Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Regulatory Committee held on the 15th of September, and a very special welcome to Councillor Clempson, who has rejoined us today. We are virtually back to normal, and I say that with purpose because perhaps the future will consist of hybrid meetings. Virtual is better for the planet, but face-to-face is much better for us. The first item on the agenda, do we have any apologies, Joanne? Thank you very much. And the second item, has anyone any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest to disclose? Nobody knows any of the landowners. Good, thank you. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting held on the 23rd of June in that vast room where it was actually difficult to hear everybody, but hopefully today will be much better. Do we have any comments about the minutes? Would anyone like to move the minutes?
Happy to do so.
Oh, thank you. Proposed by Councillor Oakes and seconded by Councillor Salter. Thank you. Next, we come to the guidance, which is a very important document. It is divided into 3 annexes. A, referred to definitions of public rights of way on page 11, which I'm always turning to make sure that I know what the application is referring to. Annex B, pages 21 to 30, includes the principles of diversions, which affects items 10 and 11. And Annex C, page 31 to 33, which deals with what can happen when an order has been made and it's been advertised and can obviously attract objections and representations. Now, I have been asked to make special reference to page 23 in the middle with the heavy type in deciding whether it is expedient to confirm a public path diversion order. So please make special thoughts about that paragraph when we reach items later on in the agenda. Thank you. Next, we come to the progress report on previous committee items. And yesterday, when we had our briefing, we decided this wasn't the ideal title for this because it should really say progress report on previous and future committee items, and maybe refer not just to the Highways Act, but to the Countryside Act as well. Does anyone have any questions about this? I'm sure you do, because there are some dates here that might fill you with dismay. While you're looking, I did ask David whether we ought to have regulatory committee meetings more often to clear the backlog, and he assured me that most of them have actually been before committee and they're awaiting implementation. And the one on page 37 at the bottom, Cheshire Lines, which goes back to 1986, which is nearly 40 years ago. Hundreds of people are using it with permissive use, and it's a great public benefit. So is that all I say about it? Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry, Councillor Goulthorpe.
Can you, you can hear me, I think, yes. It's queries really, page 40.
Yeah.
Definitive map modification orders, quite a number there in my patch. Salterfifth Lane 2006, Stoopshill 2008, and Dart Lane Earby 2009. Could somebody explain to me, they are now awaiting for submission to the planning inspectorate for determination. My logic says, well, we've been waiting a long time. Is there any issues with this or not?
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Yes, it's quite a lengthy process. There are a few reasons why those haven't been submitted yet. It's not necessarily that all that time since the application they've been waiting to be submitted. It's since the order was made, and where an order has any objections, or theoretically, even if it has representations in support, but that generally isn't a problem. But if it has objections, we don't have the power at County Council to confirm the order, and we have to submit it. We don't have any option under the legislation. We can't even decide, no, nobody's bothered about it anymore, we withdraw it. Once the order's made, any objections, we have to submit it to the Planning Inspectorate. The process is quite onerous, particularly for the legal team, and they have to timetable in as well the fact that it's quite likely to, at least potentially, and often does, lead to a public inquiry or a hearing, which means for the solicitors, they have to be able to make sure that they can timetable them in without a clash with a small team. So they don't send them all off immediately. They try and space them out. But the biggest thing is just the sheer number and the amount of work for a small number of officers to do.
Could I,
Yes,
Chairman, ask a
supplementary.
supplementary on that? It would be helpful if we knew, the projected dates on these, because if I was asked the question, I would find it very, very difficult to say, well, according to my information, they are now awaiting submission to the Planning Inspectorate. So everything's been dealt with as far as that statement is concerned. And yet I accept that there was maybe lodged in 2006 or whatever, and there was a period of time before you actually got to that. But have we any idea on how long it's going to be before they're actually passed on to the inspectorate?
I don't think we have, is the short answer.
Okay.
One of the things about these is it's very difficult, even with a lot of experienced officers, it's very difficult to be able to predict which ones are going to be quick and which ones are going to take a long time. We are trying within the Public Rights of Way team and within the solicitors team to increase the amount of officer time we can put into these things, but they are very labour intensive. We've only got a small number of people doing them, and that's the bottom line, really.
Okay. I understand what you're saying. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Goulthorpe. Any other queries about progress report? No, thank you. We turn now to item number 6, which is a DMMO application for the addition of a bridleway along Snuff Mill Lane from the end of section recorded as U11870 to the Lune Estuary Path in Stodday near Lancaster. Now, first we're going to ask Jane, who is the officer who is going to give us documentary evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So agenda item 6 is an application which was received under the Section 14 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981. It was to record on the definitive map and statement of public rights of way a bridleway along the unrecorded section of Snuff Mill Lane to the Lune Estuary Path at Stodday near Lancaster. The report detailing the application can be found on pages 43 to 101 of the committee bundle, with a detailed plan of the route found on page 99. Just on your screen at the moment is just the general location plan, which shows you that it's just to the north of Lancaster. And here is on the screen now is the more detailed application plan, committee plan showing the route. So the application the route was described by the applicant as terminating at the junction with the Lune Estuary Path. However, when investigating the application, it became apparent that the historical route of Snuff Mill Lane extended as far as the Salt Marsh and didn't stop at the railway, which is now the Lune Estuary Path. So the route under investigation is therefore shown on the committee plan between points A, B, X, C and D, and is about 475 metres long. So it's the section C to D, which is the additional bit which wasn't in the original application. So I carried out an inspection of the route in October 2020. And the route starts at the western end of the section of Snuff Mill Lane, which is recorded as a publicly maintainable vehicular road and which is tarmacked up to point A. At point A, there's access leading from Snuff Mill Lane to the water treatment works, which is situated just to the north of the route. The route itself extends in a westerly direction from point A along a stone surface track, which is bounded by trees. It continues for approximately 75 metres with evidence of regular use by farm vehicles accessing fields immediately to the east of point B. Now at point B, a padlock metal barrier across the route restricts access to approximately 1.5 metres wide. The gap to the side of the barrier is wide enough to allow for walkers, cyclists, horse riders and motorbikes to pass through. And a worn track past the barrier suggests this route was in regular use. Beyond point B, the route continues west, bounded by hedges, and was overgrown when I inspected it. There was a solid stone surfaced route which ran adjacent to an unmarked watercourse for approximately 130 metres to a point where the watercourse was culverted. In places, the surface of the route was muddy with some standing water, and particularly where the watercourse was overgrown and required cleaning. At the time of inspection, the culvert was blocked and the water was running down the route like a stream. Since that time, I understand that work's been carried out by the parish council to alleviate the flooding and to resurface the path. The route continues in a southwesterly direction towards the dismantled railway. And just before reaching a gate at point C, there were two metal signs which were barely visible in the overgrowth, warning anyone heading west along the route about the presence of horse riders and of humps to be encountered when joining and continuing along the Lune Estuary Path. Immediately before reaching the Lune Estuary Path, there was a padlocked metal gate which was across the route at point C, with a well-worn track passing around a smaller gap to the side. The route under investigation meets the multi-user path with a blue and white sign pointing back along the route under investigation towards point A with the words Stoddy. So from point C, the route under investigation crosses the Lune Estuary Path and continues west into a circular area which is raised above the salt marsh where picnic benches and tables have been placed. There's no physical evidence of the former railway crossing at point C and no evidence of the buildings which were shown to have existed following the construction of the railway, either close to point C or to the route which provided access from point C into the picnic area. The shape of the ramp shown on the Ordnance Survey maps detailed in the report, which provided access down onto the salt marsh, remains, although its shape is softened and the masonry is no longer visible and it's now overgrown and impassable. So as with all applications, a variety of maps, plans and other documents were examined to discover when the route might have come into being and try and determine what its status might be. The application's been made based entirely on historical map and documentary evidence, and details are included in the report, which was made available to members prior to this meeting. As with most cases investigated, there's no single piece of map or documentary evidence which stands alone to confirm the public legal status of the route. However, in this case, there appears to be strong and consistent evidence from the 1800s suggesting that the route was believed to be and was capable of being used as a public vehicular route at that time. It's shown in its entirety as a crossroad on two key small-scale commercial maps. Yates's map, published in 1788, and Greenwood's map of 1818, and partially shown on Hennett's map of Lancashire, which was published in 1830. It's consistently shown as part of Snuff Mill Lane, continuing west from the adopted section of Snuff Mill Lane, with no discernible difference in how it's shown east or west of Point A. And most significantly in this case, it's depicted as a road on the tithe map of 1842, and in the railway plans and sections and book of reference compiled in 1878, it's clearly recorded as a public road. Now, when the railway was subsequently built, a substantial ramped access was constructed to provide access across the railway from the route under investigation to the estuary, consistent with the requirement to provide a substantial crossing point for a public road. Maps and photographs post-dating the construction of the railway consistently show the route existed and appeared capable of being used. And since the construction of the sewage works north of the route in the mid-1950s and the removal of the railway lines in the 1960s, use of the route by vehicles appears to have diminished from point B through to point C, although evidence suggests that it's still frequently used by walkers, cyclists, horse riders accessing the Lune Estuary path. The application was for a bridleway, but having researched the history of the route, it's considered that the evidence would indicate that the route was a vehicular public highway. The Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act 2006 will have extinguished any mechanically propelled vehicular rights along the route, so it's advised that the appropriate status to be recorded would be restricted byway. Thank you, Chair. Back to you.
Thank you, Chair. So to summarise, the factors in support of making this order, as set out at page 96 of the report, are the historical documentary evidence, and there is no particular evidence against making the order. The conclusion from Legal and Democratic Services can be summarised as follows. In this matter, there is no user evidence, and the evidence is based on how the route is shown on the various old maps and documents, from which it is suggested that there is sufficient indication that it was already dedicated and used by the public as a highway. The evaluation of these documents by colleagues in the Rights of Way team are set out in the report. An inference of dedication at common law is able, on balance, to be made. Committee will note that the recommendation is that the route be recorded as a restricted byway. This is not what the applicant applied for, but the authority is required to update its records according to the evidence, and so the restricted byway application is considered appropriate. Committee will note that the line of the route is also not quite what the applicant applied for, but again, based on the evidence, the line of the route to be recorded is now more clear and extends to the salt marsh. As the old highway line has not been stopped up, the highway rights remain where they always have been. The present day state of the route again is not relevant to whether the old highway exists and should now be recorded. In conclusion, it is therefore recommended to make an order as set out in the recommendation at the beginning of the report, and that it be promoted to confirmation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. We actually did this walk on the site visit during brilliant sunshine, and what was really interesting about this footpath, or what we want to make a restricted byway, was that it preceded the railway being built, and it survived after the railway had been dismantled. So are there any queries or comments from the members? Yes, Councillor Salton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would certainly say, looking at the information we have before us, there seems to be very strong historical evidence here. So I think there's very good grounds for accepting the officer's recommendation. I would also say, as a point of interest, the local parish council seem to have invested a bit of money in improving the surface, which, whilst perhaps not a key thing, it's interesting, it's indicative that the route is being used and is seen as having some value. Yeah, I'd like to propose the officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Salter. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Clempson. Those in favour? Thank you. Those against? It's carried. Thank you. Right, agenda items. I beg your pardon. You're absolutely right. Yes, because normally this room is quite chilly. Thank you, Councillor Parr. It would be healthier if we had some windows open. Just wait for that to be done. And while we're waiting, I'd just like to comment on how nice it is to see the officers present. So it's lovely to see you face to face. Thank you very much. Yes, you were right. Councillor Cheetham, if you get too cold, then we'll close the one directly behind you. Thank you for suggesting that, Councillor Parr. Agenda item 7, investigation into the existence of public rights of access along Limers Lane, Great Harwood. Now, the committee plan is on page 147, but I'm sure it will be behind me very soon, showing the application route. And again, Jane will run through the slides and give us a summary of the documentary evidence. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. So as the Chair has explained, this item 7 can be found on pages 103 to 1449 of the committee bundle, with the detailed plan of the route on page 147, and it's just projected onto the screen so that you can see it. Now, although most of the Wildlife and Countryside Act matters considered by committee are as a result of applications made to the County Council, there are times when, on the discovery of evidence, matters are brought before committee without an application having been made. In this particular case, we have no application, but it was brought to the attention of officers that the route known as Limers Lane between Blackburn Old Road and Clinkham Road, Great Harwood, was not recorded on the definitive map and statement of public rights of way, and was not recorded on the County Council's list of streets as a publicly maintainable highway. Now, having looked at the fact that the route was included on a number of old commercial maps, officers considered that the route may in fact be a public highway and that its legal status should be investigated. The route under investigation is shown on the map, projected on the screen, between points A, B, C and D. I carried out a site inspection in February 2021 and took some photographs which I'll now share with you on the screen. So the route commences at point A on the committee plan on Blackburn Old Road and ascends gently down along a roughly tarmacked access track which provides access into Blackleach Farm. The route leaves the tarmac access track approximately 15 metres from point A and continues in a generally southwesterly direction along an unsurfaced track around the back of the property. The route is bounded on both sides and was largely overgrown with brambles at the time it was inspected, with a narrow trodden track down the centre indicative of pedestrian use. As the route curves to continue in a more southerly direction, It's joined, just find the picture, there we go. It is joined by a wooden stile with stone posts on either side at point B by footpath 96, and a trodden track was visible leading from the stile to continue onto the route. Between point B and point C, the route continues as a bounded track which was boggy underfoot and overgrown in places. At point C, the route is joined by footpath 98, and again there was evidence that the footpath was being used and that people were continuing along the route under investigation on foot. From point C, the route continues, still bounded by a combination of fences, overgrown hedges and broken stone walls, to cross a culverted watercourse, and then to ascend uphill to continue for approximately 70 metres along a stone surface track, which provides direct access from adjacent fields along the route to point D. And at point D, the route meets the cobbled surface of Clinkham Road. Okay. At the time, I noted that whilst now largely out of repair, the route appeared to be one of some antiquity, which would, if maintained, be wide enough to be capable of being used by vehicles. There were no gates across the route and no signs indicating whether it was considered to be public or private. Last week, the route was visited by the chair and vice chair of the committee, accompanied by David, and I understand that the route's been cleared of overgrowth and was much easier to walk along. Okay, so this investigation has been carried out based entirely on map and historical map and documentary evidence, and a detailed analysis of our investigations are again included in the report made available to members. As with most cases investigated, there's no single piece of map or documentary evidence which stands alone to confirm the public legal status of the route. But in this case, there appears to be strong and consistent evidence from the mid-1700s onwards, suggesting that the route was believed to be and was capable of being used as a public vehicular route at that time. It was first shown to exist on a map accompanying an agreement dated 1762, where it appears to have already existed as a substantial through route, consistent with how other public vehicular routes are shown at that time. It's shown in its entirety as a crossroad on two key small commercial maps, Yates's map of 1788 and Greenwood's map of 1818. And it's partially shown on Hennett's map, published in 1830. These maps were produced primarily for travellers and would not have served the purpose unless most of the ways shown were available to the public. The depiction of Limers Lane in the same way as public carriageways suggests Limers Lane is also a public carriageway. It's then consistently shown as a substantial through route linking to other public vehicular routes on all Ordnance Survey maps examined. It's consistently named as Limers Lane and shown ungated and consistent with how other public vehicular routes were shown. On the first edition 25-inch map, it's shown with a thickened line down the east side to denote a metalled public road for wheeled traffic kept in proper repair by the local highway authority. It's also shown on Bartholomew's small-scale maps in the first half of the 1900s as a road, although use of the route may have declined by that time as a consequence of the surface being noted as being inferior. Bartholomew's maps were produced to a significant degree for cyclists who were then only allowed on carriageways and had a system of revision from user information. So the depiction of Limers Lane on these maps again supports it being public carriageway. It's also clearly shown excluded from the numbered hereditaments on the Finance Act maps prepared in the 1900s, consistent with the view that it was a public highway, most probably vehicular. In the 1950s, Great Harwood Urban District Council recorded two public footpaths terminating on the route at points B and point C, suggesting that they did not consider Limers Lane required to be recorded as a public right-of-way on the definitive map and statement because public vehicular rights already existed along it. Since the mid-1950s, the maps and aerial photographs examined indicate use of the route declined, particularly with vehicles, and recent site evidence now suggests that it's some time since the route has been used as a vehicular-through route, with only the short section from point A leading directly into Blackleach and a short section from point D used by farm vehicles to access an adjacent field being accessible to vehicles. However, any decline in use would not remove any public rights already existing, and we considered that there was sufficient evidence supportive of the route under investigation being a very old vehicular highway, and that the appropriate status for the old vehicular route to be recorded is restricted byway. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, thank you, Jane. Lindsay, would you like to give the summary from Legal Services? Thank you.
Thank you. The conclusion from Legal and Democratic Services can be summarised as follows. In this matter, there is no user evidence, and the evidence is based on how the route is shown on the various old maps and documents, from which it is suggested that there is sufficient indication that it was already dedicated and used by the public as a highway. The evaluation of these documents by colleagues in the Rights of Way team are set out in the report. An inference of dedication at common law is able, on balance, to be made. Committee will note that this was an investigation by officers rather than an application. Committee will also note that the recommendation is that the route be recorded as a restricted byway. The authority is required to update its records according to the evidence, and so the restricted byway application is considered appropriate. In conclusion, it is therefore recommended to make the order as set out in the recommendation at the beginning of the report, and that it be promoted to confirmation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. To underline what we've heard, when we walked it on the site visit, it had been mown and cared for and was a wide path. So it's obviously maintained and cared for. We would have liked to have known by whom, but there was no one to ask. Are there any queries or comments from? Yes, Councillor Howard.
Thank you, Chair. First off, it says on the first page that this was brought to the attention of officers, and I'm wondering by who, because it's just been stated there's no user evidence, and this is a self-started application. So is it usual for officers to spend that amount of time on an application with no user evidence that somebody has brought to our attention?
David, would you like to respond? Thank you.
David, it was actually brought to our attention by our network officer for that area. So it's the County Council network officer who was dealing with reports about the two public footpaths that link to the route, and was dealing with some repair work that was needed to that. And they realised that the route that it linked to wasn't recorded. We looked at it primarily because we try and prioritise routes, particularly where we're looking at potential restricted byway or bridleway applications or investigations, because of the public benefit, basically, to the greatest number of people. And also, when we initially looked at it, it was very overgrown, so access was quite difficult. We don't know who's carried out the work, but that's how it came to me. It was from members of our own team identifying that there was an issue with the fact that two public footpaths linked to something that wasn't recorded.
I realise it's not really relevant to the decision, but can I just ask, if this recommendation is accepted, what standard is LCC expected to get that path to? Because it's obviously just a rough track at the moment, isn't it?
It's maintainable, what case law refers to as the ordinary traffic of the neighbourhood. In other words, if it's being used by it's not in a town, it's not that far away, it's a rural location. It's going to be used by walkers who are properly shod rather than shuffling along in slippers, or people who are expecting that sort of environment. It's going to be, and possibly already is, used by mountain bikers or horse riders. So it would be maintained in a state that is appropriate to those users. So we wouldn't be expected to maintain it We wouldn't be looking to put a stone surface, certainly not a tarmac surface. Sorry? No, it would be a rural path used by horse riders, walkers and mountain bikers.
Thank you, David. Any other comments or queries? Do we have a proposer for the officer's recommendations? Thank you. Do we have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Cheetham. Those in favour? Those against? And that one's carried. Thank you very much. Agenda item 8. Application for the upgrading of existing public footpaths on the definitive map and statement of public rights of way from Liverpool Road to the junction with Northern Avenue, which continues through to the junction with Smithy Lane in Muchhool. Now, the committee plans for this on 2 pages, 207 and 209, which both show the application route. I'm sure it'll be behind me in a minute. Jane, would you like to give the summary of the historical records? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so agenda item 8 can be found on pages 151 to 212 of the committee bundle. There are 2 committee plans which show the route. I will just put it back to the first of the 2. The application submitted to the County Council was for the upgrade of to Bridleway of this particular route. It specifically referred to the application route being the routes recorded as footpaths 30 and 29, and there's no user evidence submitted. So again, we're looking purely at historical map and documentary evidence. Okay, the route is shown on the committee plans between point A and point H. You will note, though, on the committee plans that we have a orange dashed line described as the historical route. And I will go into deep, I'll just try and explain that now, and I'll show you some photographs as well, but it's quite significant because from point D on our recorded, on our application route, when we've looked at the map and documentary evidence, we have a variation of what's recorded as the public footpath and what historically we think is shown to have existed. So our route recorded as currently recorded as public footpath, which was applied for an upgrade, runs through points D to E on the black dashed line. But then we have the historical route, which is different to that, which it goes along the orange dashed lines D to E. And to further complicate it, when you walk it on the ground, the only accessible route currently takes you from point D across to point X on an unrecorded path. Right, I'll try and explain that a little bit more as I go through. So I carried out a site inspection in June 2021. The application route commences at a point on the eastern side of Liverpool Road at Muchhool. You can just see it here crossing the grass verge. At point A, the route signposted as a public footpath in accordance with its recorded status, and there's further signage provided by Muchhool Parish Council as part of a parish initiative a number of years ago, where they sort of done some little "you are here's" and shown the routes of the footpaths. Also attached to the signpost was a type notice notifying users that part of the path had eroded and that a parish council repair team would be on site shortly to fix it. So it's a good sort of indication here that we've got a very active parish council in Muchhool. So from point A, the route follows a compact stone surface path bounded to the north by a substantial wooden fence separating the route from the residential properties on Brook Lawns. And to the south, there was a sharp vegetated drop down to the watercourse, which runs parallel to the route. At point B, The fencing bounding 3 Brook Lawns curves round to continue north away from the application route, and between points B and C, the application route continued adjacent to the watercourse and bounded by hedges to the north. And just on that point, between points A and B and C, you will note when you've worked your way through all the map and historical evidence that the route is now probably quite different to what it would have been in the 17 and 1800s, because we've got housing development that is built right up to the edge of the path. We've got a watercourse that historically has run along the boundaries of the old route, which may now be slightly different in alignment, and it may be much deeper, whereas in the past it might have actually been possible to actually traverse alongside or in it. So what's on site now, we've got a very narrow path, but we have to kind of look back to the 17 and 1800s as what existed at that time. So as you approach point C, the route's crossed by a metal kissing gate, and this is where the surface of the path had been eroded. It's now been repaired by the parish council. So they've done quite a good job there, where the water had just washed out a little bit there. So beyond point C, the application route continues along a wide strip of land, which was actually approximately 10 metres wide, mostly overgrown, with a narrow stone surface path through the middle to point D. Okay, so approaching point D there. Now at point D, the recorded route of footpath 30, and this is probably where you need the plans again, turns north to continue along the boundary of the property known as Greenfield to exit onto the access road leading to Greenfield at point E. Now on site, the application route's not visible or accessible. Instead, the land crossed by the application route appears to have been fenced off just north of point D some time ago and is now very overgrown. A stone surface path continues from point D to point X on the committee plan, where it meets the recorded section of footpath 27. And the only accessible link then turns north along footpath 27 to pass through a further metal kissing gate and to rejoin the application route at point G. Okay, so there we are exiting at point G. Now between point D and point E, the recorded route of footpath 30 is not accessible, and neither is the route shown on the committee plan labelled as the historical route, which runs parallel to footpath 30, but on the west side of the boundary of Greenfield from points D to E. So again, the significance of the historical routes detailed in the map and documentary evidence part of the committee report. Now from point E, the continuation of the application route is accessible and forms part of the access road leading directly to Greenfield. At point F, the route is crossed by a metal field gate, which was open when the route was inspected. There you have, I'm just sort of going back a little bit, but that isn't actually point G. I think I've labelled that one incorrectly. I apologise. That is actually point E, where you've got the application route coming out from the overgrowth, the historical route coming out along the side of it, running parallel, but on Greenfield. So there you've got point E looking towards point G. At point G, the application route meets the footpath recorded as footpath 27 and 28 and continues east as a wide compacted earth and stone access road recorded as footpath 29. Continues down between point G and at point H, the route joins the western end of Northern Avenue, recorded as a publicly maintainable vehicle highway, with a public footpath signposted located at point H. You can see the signpost with a further circular information notice similar to the one located at point A. And just to confuse our chair and vice chair, we walked this backwards, didn't we? Not literally, but we went from point H to point A, just to make it even more confusing.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we
Okay.
walked in the opposite direction. We didn't walk it backwards.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
If just in terms of the map and documentary evidence, again, all detailed in the report, hopefully quite thoroughly, so you can follow through with all the map extracts. Again, there was no one single piece of map or documentary evidence standing alone to confirm the public status of the route. And in this particular case, the application, we thought it was finely balanced, but that there did appear to be a public carriageway established by the mid-19th century, as evidenced by the tithe award and the tithe map. Supported by Hennett and the Ordnance Survey maps, first edition, and the Ordnance Survey 1-inch Cassini reproduction. And then over the next 100 years, use and availability of the route appeared to have reduced, with the stream encroaching between points A and B, which may or may not have prevented use of part of the width. And the historical route between points D and E being incorporated into the field, which means that it may or may not have been available, and gates or possibly fences being erected at points along the route. As I said, modern use is only possible on foot, and more recently the infrastructure has been improved, but the used route between D and G is not on the historical route or the application route. I won't go through all the map and documentary because you've got it and you've seen it, but just basically we therefore conclude that the carriageway rights were established by the mid-19th century, and subsequent falling out of use of parts of the route has not removed these. However, the effects of the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act 2006 is to extinguish public rights for mechanically propelled vehicles, so the correct status would therefore be restricted byway, following the historical route, not the application route D to E. Thank you, Chair.
So to summarise, the factors in support of making this order, as set out at page 205 of the report, are the mapping evidence of a route in existence and the tithe map evidence. The factors against making an order in respect of pre-1890s vehicular route are the evidence is limited, and the factors against making an order in respect of a dedication of vehicular or bridleway after 1890 are changes to the route and inconsistent Finance Act information. The conclusion from Legal and Democratic Services can be summarised as follows. In this matter, there is no user evidence, and the evidence is based on how the route is shown on the various old maps and documents, from which it is suggested that there is sufficient indication that it was already dedicated and used by the public as a highway. The evaluation of these documents by colleagues in the Rights of Way team are set out in the report. An inference of dedication at common law is able, on balance, to be made. Committee will note that the recommendation is that the route be recorded as a restricted byway. This is not what the applicant applied for, but the authority is required to update its records according to the evidence, and so the restricted byway application is considered appropriate. Committee will also note that the line of the route in the recommendation is also not quite what the applicant applied for, but again, based on the evidence, the line of the route to be recorded is now more clear between D and E. As the old highway line has not been stopped up, the highway rights remain where they have always been. Present day state of the route again is not relevant to whether the old highway exists and should now be recorded. Issues such as maintenance and structures across the route, and even restricting some traffic because of width issues, can be dealt with by other means. In conclusion, it is suggested that on balance there is sufficient evidence for an order to be made and promoted to confirmation in accordance with the recommendation at the beginning of the report. Thank you, Chair.
It was very obvious during the site visit that Muchhall Parish Council have shown both their affection and their respect for this footpath by the quality of their maintenance. I just wondered whether there were any comments or queries from you. Thank you, Councillor Howarth. Oh, I beg your pardon. You first. Okay.
Right, thank you, Madam Chairman. I was just going to say, I would personally be satisfied with the historical evidence, although an obvious concern that one might have is the fact that the route simply isn't suitable between D and E. Now, as we've heard from the legal advice, that's not something that would be I suppose, a consideration for our decision here today. But I just wanted to clarify with officers that there would, should the committee feel that, yes, there is historic evidence for this route to be a restricted byway, this could then be revisited, and from section D to E, there could, in theory, be a map modification order to a more suitable route, such as, for instance, D to X to F. So I just wanted to ask if officers could comment on that.
Thank you, Chair. It wouldn't be a definitive map modification order to sort that out. The option would be to do a diversion if the rights were shown to exist within that property, and the available route which was suitable for the public to use. There's no reason why we couldn't come back to committee and ask for a diversion, but it wouldn't be a modification. It wouldn't be an evidence-based thing. In practical terms, I suspect that what would be done is absolutely nothing, because the route available on the ground seems to be accepted by in the public in terms of the parish council maintaining it like that, people using that route. It would be, we can't ever say as highway authority we will not assert and protect the rights of the public to use that correct legal line. What we can say is we've got a lot of things to do, and that would be a very low priority. So for the indefinite future, I can imagine people using the line that's available, and almost everybody would be blissfully unaware that actually they should be cutting through a very overgrown hedge and through somebody's garden. So it's one of these things which is more of a problem in theory than in practice, although it's absolutely important to ask those sort of questions.
Thank you very much, David. Councillor Howe.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just a query for information really on this path and any other. Clearly it's been subject to erosion, and the parish council have carried out repairs and made it into a fit state. But should this path or any other path be subject to erosion in future, whose responsibility is it to actually keep it safe and accessible?
Yes, you hit on a point that I'm sure you realised when you were asking it is not unique to this one, but there's a lot of examples throughout the county. Where it's publicly maintainable, then obviously as the highway authority we've got a responsibility. A lot of the ones that run along the edge of a riverbank don't quite extend to the riverbank, but they're a little further on the dry ground. In this particular case, it is very much affected by the erosion of the water within the lane, and it doesn't mean that we would have to do a big engineering job and culvert it or something, build a boardwalk over it or anything like that. Sometimes it gets to a point where the only way to make it accessible for the users on foot or bike or horse is to effectively bridge part of a bit that's collapsed. But we have a responsibility for doing that in most cases. There are a few cases where if it collapses suddenly and the land is no longer there, if you've got a deep river, you've got a bank collapse and it's all washed away, you've no longer got any land to put it on. The definition of the highway being that it is a way for the public over land. Well, if there isn't land, then there is no longer a right of way. So there are cases where it can be lost. But where it's more of a slump and a gradual thing, then yes, it's a maintenance problem. But we can't take that into we might be thinking, no, we don't want this one, but we can't be taking that into account. This is very much evidence-based. Do the rights exist or do they not? And then sometimes, absolutely right, it is a headache to work out what to do once we've established it's there.
Are you happy with that?
I am, and on that basis, I'll move the recommendation.
Good, thank you. Any more comments? Is anyone prepared to propose the officer's recommendations? Sorry? Oh, I beg your pardon. Thank you. And thank you very much, Councillor Cheetham. Yes. Yes, it's good evidence, isn't it? Those in favour? Thank you. Those against? No. It's carried. Thank you very much. Agenda item 9 is an investigation into an application to upgrade a footpath and add a bridleway on the definitive map and statement of public rights of way from Mill Hill Farm to Hannings Farm, Haunders Lane, Much Hall. And the committee plan showing the application route is just one this time on page 275. Now, I will turn to Jane. Thank you for your historical evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So we're staying in Much Hall, down at South Ribble, for another application here. Agenda item 9 can be found on pages 213 to 277 of the committee bundle, detailing an application under the Wildlife and Countryside Act to record a bridleway from Mill Hill Farm off Haunders Lane, Much Hall, through Marsh Farm to Hannings Farm. So the plan showing the route is it's up on screen at the moment. I think that's on page 275 of the committee bundle. And the application route is shown between points A to G. Again, we confused our chair and vice chair by walking it backwards. Well, not quite backwards, but from G to point A. But they have actually been and had a look at this route. So I carried out a site inspection back in April 2021, and again, the photographs I took at that time are included as part of this presentation. So the route appears to start just sort of in the middle of nowhere on a track. Here we are approaching point A. The actual approach to point A is an unclassified county road. It's an unsurfaced track. There's no kind of discernible difference between the track itself, which is an unclassified county road, and our application route. But here we have point A. So from point A, the application route continues as a substantial track, well used by farm vehicles, through to point B, where public footpath 3 joins the track from the east. And there's signs at point 3 indicating the presence of ground nesting birds and a request for people to stick to the marked footpaths. So beyond point B, the route continues as part of that footpath, as it continues as a substantial farm track through to point C, where the track ends and the route continues around a 90-degree bend along the edge of what was a recently ploughed up and harrowed field. So you can see on the plan, it's actually, I mean, it's kind of, the route follows the field boundaries. It's quite sort of like that. So yeah, it goes around this corner at point C, continues into the corner at point D, where the route turns again to join to go towards the farm. And at point E, it then sort of goes through this gap across a culverted stream as a grass track, where it goes through buildings which form part of Marsh Farm. And here we are at point F, coming out onto Marsh Farm. The route then continues along a compacted earth and stone surface track through to Hannings Farm at point G. Here we are approaching point G. And at point G at Hannings Farm, the route joins a route recorded as Haunders Lane. That's looking back along the application route. Okay, so the total length of the route is 810 metres. Again, no user evidence submitted with this application, but we're looking entirely at historical map and documentary evidence. We trawled through all sorts of maps and documents, all of which are detailed in the committee report, which members will have seen. Again, no single piece of map or documentary evidence standing alone to confirm public legal status of the route. And this one's slightly different from the last application that we saw. In this case, there's no early commercial maps showing the application route. The full length of the application route shown on all small scale old series Cassini map, which was significant as they were reproduced from the first edition Ordnance Survey edition. Can't get my words out. Reproduced from the Ordnance Survey first edition 1-inch maps. So it suggests that by that time, even though we haven't got the very early evidence, but by that time a substantial through route existed along the application route by the mid-1800s, which would appear to have been capable of being used, although again, Ordnance Survey doesn't necessarily indicate whether such use was public or private. But then we've got a route that's consistently shown on all Ordnance Survey maps examined, including those at the small scale. In the early 1900s, it was shown excluded from the Finance Act taxation process, consistent with the view that it was a public highway, and most probably vehicular, as it's shown on all 3 editions of Bartholomew's maps as a minor through route, whilst Hornders Lane, which is a public vehicular route, wasn't shown. Of particular interest is the fact that the route passes through farmland and was partly unenclosed, yet it remained largely unaltered. And when Marsh Farm was built adjacent to the route at Point H, the route remained unaltered, with the buildings positioned along either side of the route, but not interfering with it in any way. So to conclude, officers were of the opinion that whilst it would appear that the route would be predominantly used for agricultural purposes, both in the past and in more recent times, it is a through route and does provide access to and past a number of properties and connects to public vehicular highways. Whilst it's perhaps not an obvious through route for the public connecting to places of interest, it does appear that it's a route of some antiquity and that it was considered to be and was used in the past as a public through route. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jane. Lindsay, would you like to give a summary of legal services? Thank you.
So to summarise, the factors in support of making this order, as set out at page 271 of the report, are the map and other documentary evidence, and there's no particular evidence against making an order. The conclusion from Legal and Democratic Services can be summarised as follows. In this matter, there's no user evidence, and the evidence is based on how the route is shown on the various old maps and documents, from which it is suggested that there is sufficient indication that it was already dedicated and used by the public as a highway. The evaluation of these documents by colleagues in the Rights of Way team are set out in the report. An inference of dedication at common law is able, on balance, to be made. Committee will note that the recommendation is that the route be recorded as a restricted byway. This is not what the applicant applied for, but the authority is required to update its records according to the evidence, and so the restricted byway application is considered appropriate. In conclusion, it is therefore recommended to make an order as set out in the recommendation at the beginning of the report, and that it be promoted to confirmation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. As you can see from Jane's photographs, the farmer has obliterated some of the footpath in places to maximise his bounty from the land. And whilst walking, we met the farmer's either son-in-law or son, not quite sure, who stated he would be making a non-aggressive objection because they're used to having all that land to themselves. So any comments or queries from members? Thank you, Councillor Clempson.
Just an observation, really. And I've seen them before on cases like this. So Marsh Farm, this goes right through Marsh Farm. So is there not a better alternative? Because I'm talking about for everybody, not only for the farmer, but for the people who use the path. Can we not put it, you know, around Marsh Farm? That it's more scenic and a better route. I just think that going through would obviously get the backup of the farmer, which it obviously has, and I don't see the you know, why.
Thank you for that. It's not a farmyard with livestock in it. It's just got decrepit, well, sorry, shouldn't perhaps say that, but it's got farm machinery in it. So if a footpath goes through it, I don't think it will cause any damage to anything belonging to the farm. But David.
Thank you, Chair. Even if it was a very busy yard and it would have a great impact, that's not within the remit of committee to say, no, it'd be better to have somewhere else. But coming back to what Councillor Salter was saying earlier on, that if it is in a place where it's not good for the public, not good for the landowner, then there's a separate process, which in fact, the next two items on the agenda this time are about that, about diverting it to somewhere that is better, either for the landowner or better for the public or better for both. And where it's a particular problem, it might be that is done very quickly. And in the previous one that Councillor Salter raised, it's likely that people would carry on using the route that is available on the ground, and then the legal line would catch up with it. In this particular case, as Chair has said, it's not as big a problem on the ground as it would look from the map. But either way, when we're looking at definitive map modification orders, committee has to make the decision solely on the evidence of whether rights exist, not on whether they're a problem to deal with or how we can deal with it. That has to be taken legally, that has to be taken as a separate exercise.
Could I just add to that? I might not have made it clear, but between points B and G, so actually going through Marsh Farm, it is already recorded as public footpath. So we're looking at the addition of public rights between points A to B and the upgrading. So the fact that we might potentially have a route that's under recorded between points B to G, but Marsh Farm already have members of the public walking through on that route.
Are you happy, Councillor Clenson? Do you want to come back?
Madam Chairman, just want to come back and just a small point. I get everything you said, and we've done this before, David, where I've said things like this, and you put me in my place, which you should. However, all I'm going to say is I believe that councillors are here. If policy was always 100%, we wouldn't need councillors. It'd be run by officers. It's not, and I think we try to give a little bit of common sense sometimes, and that's all I was doing, and just questioning that, and I'll keep doing it. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Very valid point, Councillor Kempson. Thank you. Any other queries or comments? Do we have a proposer for the officer's recommendation? Councillor Salter, do we have a seconder? I don't. Oh, thank you, Councillor Clempson. Those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? You didn't put your hand up, Councillor Haythornthwaite. Thank you. Carried. Right, now we come to a different kettle of fish. Agenda item 10, the proposed diversion of part of footpath Hothersall 13 in the Ribble Valley. Again, this time, and she's been sitting very patiently, we have Ros, who is going to give us some of the historical evidence. Thank you, Ros.
Thank you. Yes, so the prospective owners of the residential property at Welsh House Barn, Hothersall Lane, Longridge, have applied to Lancashire County Council for an order to be made under Section 119 of the Highways Act 1980 to divert part of footpath 13 Hothersall, Ribble Valley Borough. You'll see the location plan is on page 287 and the detailed order map is on 285. So I don't know if you can make that out there, but the site is located to the southeast of Longridge. On the order plan, the route to be diverted is shown by a bold continuous line marked A to B, and the proposed alternative route is just to take it onto the other side of the fence and hedge on the line A to C to B. So we'll look first at the photographs of the current footpath proposed to be diverted. So this is at point A at the entrance to Welsh House Barn, and the existing route runs straight down the middle of the driveway. It continues, as you'll have seen on the order map, in a straight line, and at some point in the past, an annex building to the house has been built on top of the footpath or very close to the footpath. So the footpath is obstructed at that point. There is a gap there, but the majority of the width of the existing footpath has actually been built over. And then this is from point B looking back towards point A. So if you can make out there, if you look at the bottom of the photograph is a fence and a hedge, and the route, we're looking back towards the buildings across a garden. And this is point B, where the end point of the section to be diverted is. Proposed new route runs from A to C to B. So back at point A again, the existing route going down the driveway, but the proposed alternative is to veer left and go through a gate at this point to run along the field edge. And then running along, it's a nice grass firm surface, 2 meters in width, the footpath is proposed to be. Running along the edge of the field, continuing on the other side of the garden area, and then turning to go through a gate at point C to arrive at point B. So the recorded alignment of the footpath is along the driveway through the residential and private garden areas of the property, and it's proposed that the footpath will be diverted to run along the edge of the adjacent field. As you'll have seen from the slides, the recorded alignment of the footpath runs along the driveway, passes through the private and residential areas of the property, and the new footpath will be of benefit to the owners of the land because it will run outside the residential area, enabling the existing obstructions on the footpath to be retained and provide the residents with an improvement in privacy and security. The new footpath will provide open views of the countryside and a more obvious, safe and convenient footpath away from the driveway and the buildings and the private garden area at Welsh House Barn. Therefore, the users of the footpath are likely to find the new footpath easier to use and feel more comfortable using it than they would do with the existing route. Therefore, it's suggested that recommendations 1, 2 and 3 be accepted.
Thank you very much, Ros. I understand that, Lindsay, you don't have to add anything unless you want to jump in, which you don't.
No, that's fine, Chair.
Thank you. Welsh House Barn is about to be sold, and the present owners diverted this and took matters into their own hands. But the new owners want to do things properly, hence this application. And I admire their honesty. I now open it for comments and queries from you. Yes, Councillor Parr.
I just want to ask what seems to me to be an obvious question. This footpath is being rerouted around an annex. Should this not have come up when planning application was considered for this annex?
Absolutely, it should. I don't know whether the annex was built following planning permission or under permitted development or simply without any permission. But whichever of those it was, yes, the footpath should have been diverted first, but it's not at all uncommon, unfortunately, that doesn't happen. So yes, the owners have got a footpath running through their building. We don't very often go knocking a hole in either end and letting people walk through. We do tend to take the pragmatic approach of inviting them to apply for a diversion. In this particular case, the diversion takes it out of the garden as well as out of the building, which a lot of people will feel more comfortable about. We have to look at it in terms of the legislation. We have to look at it on its merits without any, well, they should have, without any feeling of we should punish them for not having done it properly. But you're absolutely right. It should have been done properly when the thing was built.
Right. If I can just follow on from that, sorry. It never happens then that planning permission will be refused for such a building. It would just be requested, if it was fully investigated, that a footpath would be rerouted rather than permission for the building to be refused.
If the planning permission was obtained, then the owners could apply for a diversion under the Town and Country Planning Act instead of the Highways Act that's been done here. And then the planning authority can do the diversion rather than county council do the diversion. It's a slightly more streamlined process, and the tests are simply to enable the development rather than in the interest of the landowner or the public, amongst the other conditions. But the basic test is different. And it can't be used. It can't be used as a way of stopping the development in terms of the diversion order. But that element of the fact that the path would have to be diverted can be taken into account when considering whether to grant planning permission or not.
Thank you.
Happy with that. Thank you. Somebody else had their hand up. Yeah, Councillor Howard.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I am a bit concerned that this is even before committee today, while I accept that it's a pragmatic approach and avoids having to knock a hole through the annex walls. We're being asked to take a decision without any of the evidence. We haven't had replies to consultations. We don't know if there are any objections, and yet we're being asked to take a decision and remain neutral. Well, there may be some very valid objections which committee might want to take into account. So I do question why being asked to take a decision without seeing any of the consultation replies and any objections if they exist. And it seems to be to satisfy a purchase of a property by people who want to do it the right way.
It's always a difficult balance how much of a process to do before we make before we decide to bring it to committee and before committee decide whether to make an order. The danger of doing of consultation at each stage is you end up repeating having the debate, which is inefficient, not just for county council, but for everybody else involved. But we do seek out informally consultation beforehand, and the formal consultation then happens at the order stage. Particularly in this case, I don't know whether, have you got anything else to add, Ros?
Just that there's a couple more weeks to run for the consultation deadlines, the consultations to be received, like informal consultations. If anything adverse, any adverse comments or potential objections do come in, we could always report back to the next committee with those comments. But once the deadline has passed, if there are no adverse comments or objections, county council could make the order, give them recommendation from committee. There was an earlier proposal on this site to divert it, if you can imagine, well, on the plan where it's just taking it to the other side of the boundary. An earlier application was suggesting that it took it around the far side of the field, so kind of taking it much further away and with a right angle turn to bring it back again. And the consultations for that proposal were that they felt it was too long a diversion and what's wrong with the route as it is on the ground at the moment. So that was kind of steering the applicant towards, well, we'll have the minimum change that's feasible on the ground.
Come back.
So I was going to say, so in effect, this proposal is a result of the informal consultation.
I can just come back because what was just said is not what is being recommended. What was just said was that if there are any adverse objections or anything comes forward, it can come back to committee. What is being proposed and recommended is that if there are any objections, we do nothing and send it to the Secretary of State. So that isn't what is in the proposal.
Yeah, sorry, I should have clarified. I don't mean formal objections, because once the order is made, we then it's advertised for formal objections to be submitted. But what we try to do, it's not statutory, but it's recommended that we do informal consultations prior to the order being made, so to iron out basically any potential difficulties or take any recommendations on board, which is on board as a response to the consultations, which is sort of what happened in this case, whereas the original proposal was a much longer diversion, and then it became clear that it should be that there would be more chance of success with a shorter diversion. So when I say objections, I mean informal objections to the informal consultations. Now, if there are formal objections received during the 4-week period after the order is made, that's when, if they can't be resolved, it will be sent to the Secretary of State for decision.
But not brought back to committee for us to actually take a decision. We're preempting the fact that there might be an objection.
No, sorry, it's if there are no objections to the informal consultations in, say, 2 weeks or when the deadline is, the county council, given the recommendation, we would then be able to make the order, so seal that the order's made, and then commence the formal objection period for 4 weeks. But if everybody is happy by the time the consultation period, the informal consultation period is up, that's fine, we can make the order. But if there are adverse comments or objections to the informal consultation that we feel might affect the assessment of the tests and criteria for the diversion order, then bring it back to the next committee. to
Could I
to
just add
provide you
one
with
thing?
details of that.
Thank you. From our site visit, it was obvious that the diversion is not detrimental to the public in any way whatsoever. In fact, it's just the other side of the garden wall. Now, I know the present owners have done something that's reprehensible, but it's done now. Their garden is full of other buildings, bars and all sorts. There isn't much room for flora. But the point for me was that it wasn't detrimental to the public. I just wanted to say that. Sorry.
I don't know if I've picked it correctly. I don't feel that your question has been properly answered yet. Are you satisfied or?
No, because
No.
what we're being asked to approve is not what is being said.
Thank you. No, I just wanted clarification that it hadn't been answered. Effectively, it's a two-stage process. The stage of making an order is far more rigid. Once an order is made, there isn't the opportunity to say, oh, well, it would have been better over here. It's either an object to it or agree to it in terms of the public. The County Council's stance on that order is that's referred to in Annex C for the guidance about where there isn't public benefit, where it's being done in the interest of the landowners, which is quite a legitimate thing to do, but there are many cases where if it's in the interest of the landowner, not of the public, then it ought to be the landowner that pays the cost. And because the legislation doesn't allow us to recharge the cost of us sending a solicitor to fight the case at a public inquiry, what we say is that the County Council should take a neutral stance so that effectively then the owner who wants to pursue that application and therefore that order can either go themselves or employ their own solicitor to go and fight it at public inquiry or exchange of correspondence with through the planning inspectorate. So that's the formal stage. But because that is quite bureaucratic and expensive, we want to try and avoid getting to the point where we're going to get objections. We want to make an order that everybody's already happy with. So we need that flexibility that isn't in the order process. And that flexibility is enabled by having the informal consultations first. So the informal consultation in this case, which resulted in saying no, the original proposal around the far side of the field wasn't what people would be happy with, and there were likely to be objections. Therefore, the one just the other side of the wall on the near side of the field, which people are happy with. But what we're saying here is subject to nobody else flagging up that they're not happy with it. So we think everybody's happy with it. We're not certain because there's always, if you give somebody a deadline, it's just human nature. They tend to wait until just before the deadline before saying, no, we don't like it. So subject to them not saying that, the recommendation is to make the order. If somebody really comes up with an objection in that time, then we come back to committee and committee can then take a view taking that objection into account.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess I want to say 2 points on this. On the one hand, I do agree with you that if you are on site and you're looking at the situation on the ground, it is pretty clear that the new route has some significant advantages. It is a sort of pleasant, very short, but pleasant little stretch, and it does appear to be more pleasant than going alongside or through the building and garden on the current route. So in that sense, I think that we probably do have the key information from the photos and the maps and such forth to make this particular decision. But equally, I do feel a certain level of concern, and I share, Councillor Howarth's concern that in a sense, we don't have all of the information. It strikes me as procedurally that if you are going to have an informal consultation, would it not be helpful to have the deadline of the informal consultation set such that we are likely to have the consultation responses before the committee meeting? And I mean, I would value hearing what the parish council have to say and hearing what others have to say, even though in this case, it might appear, you know, a relatively advantageous diversion. Is that something that could be looked at for the future, that we make sure that we do have every opportunity to have all of the information before us?
I think you're absolutely right. Yes, and it is something that we try to do. I think perhaps we should try harder.
Just to carry on from Councillor Salter's point, the Ribble Valley hasn't responded. Ribble Valley Borough Council hasn't responded. But to paraphrase the officer's recommendations, if we have the situation that there are no objections, which we have none, and I take the point that we have none at the moment, but Ribble Valley Borough Council hasn't even responded. So I am happy to, I don't know if the chairman's allowed to propose, but I'm happy with the officer's recommendations. Any more questions or queries? Thank you. Those in favour? Those against? So we have some abstentions. I hope somebody's counting. And Councillor Howard, yeah. Thank you very much. Right, agenda item 11. Now, this is an item that has kept laptops and telephones hot over the weekend. But before we go any further, I'll just give the executive summary. The proposed diversion of part of footpath 163 in Briarcliff, which is in Burnley Borough. The committee plans are on page 295, showing the application route. And again, Ros will outline the documentary evidence. Thank you, Ros.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So on the screen now, you can see the location plan showing the site of the proposed diversion to the northeast of Burnley. The detailed order map to show the diversion. The route to be diverted is the bold black line, continuous black line A to B, and the proposed new route is A to C and then down to B, shown by the bold dashed line. The information on the Ordnance Survey base map at this on this plan isn't completely up to date, so I've superimposed the diversion proposal onto an aerial photograph. So this isn't included in the committee papers, but in the presentation it might assist for you to see, kind of get an impression of the situation on the ground and the various buildings that there are. In particular, there's a barn that's been built over the footpath. So I'll show you the slides of the footpath to be diverted first. So this is at point A on the order plan. And the diversion commences here. It runs. There's a stone wall has been erected, and so there's no evidence of what the entrance to the footpath would have been. But the applicants have left a gap in the wall to provide access onto the definitive route. The route continues over the garden. I should mention there's probably a slide later on that shows that there's a very well signed and an easy to use and wide alternative route, but for the purposes of that's just alongside here, but for the purposes of the diversion, we're looking at the existing recorded alignment, and therefore that's shown by the red line. So it continues over the garden, it runs through a gate, and actually where the arrow is pointing is correct, where it's continues towards the barn, and the barn has unfortunately been built on top of the footpath by previous owners, and then the footpath continues, cuts the corner of this paddock. There is an alternative route that's you might just be able to make out in the bottom left of the photograph, which is a temporary footpath that's been placed to provide a route around the edge of the paddock. And then it continues across to a band of trees. You can probably make out better on the order map that on the approach to point B, the footpath cuts through the woodland. And this is showing because the footpath is obstructed or has been planted on in the past, but there is this temporary alternative route that runs around. So there's a gate and it's signed and easy to use. And then just looking back from point B along the existing route to the woodland. So the proposed new route is to run from point A along the yellow line. So this is the photograph that I was referring to previously, where there's the entrance to the property. There's a gate and a pedestrian gate, and it's very clear that that route is available for public use, and the owners haven't tried to dissuade any public use of the footpath at all. It's the fact it's moved in the past and has ended up where it is, but the proposal is to move it onto this different alignment. There'll be a gap in the trees at this point, with one of the trees remaining to prevent vehicles being able to use the route. The route is proposed to be 3 meters wide, which, as I'll explain later, is because there's the potential for it to be upgraded to bridleway use. So 3 meter wide, fenced off from the rest of the paddock, running along this field edge, continuing to the woodland, where there would need to be some of the trees and shrubs cleared here at this point to provide a route through, to meet up with the Brun Valley Greenway, which is a concessionary multi-user route that's provided by Burnley Borough Council. And then the footpath will run down this section, and down, continue down, and continuing towards point B, and then continuing to point B, and that's point B. So as you'll have seen from the slides, the recorded alignment of the footpath crosses a private garden, farmyard, a paddock, a strip of woodland, and part of the footpath is obstructed by a barn that was erected before the current owners purchased the property. A footpath around the barn, the paddock, and the wooded area has been provided as a temporary measure to ensure that public access through the site is available, albeit not on the legal alignment. The report states that the new route will have a width of 3 meters. Recent discussions with the applicants have confirmed that that will be the case, with the exception of a 1 metre length located approximately 10 metres to the west of point A, where the width will be limited to 1.6 metres. This will be a gap between a tree and a fence post, which will enable that tree to be retained and prevent vehicle access to the new footpath. It is therefore requested that an amendment to the detail of the committee report be noted on page 291 under the heading of the description of the new footpath, that the width between A to C be 3 metres, with the exception of a length of 1 metre located 10 metres to the west of point A, where the width will be limited to 1.6 metres, and the same amendment be made in the width described in the following section of the report on page 291 under the other particulars column of the definitive statement variation. The new route is approximately a third longer than the existing. However, the increased width, the firm surface and reduced gradient of section C to B will be easier to negotiate than the length of the slope at the southern section of the existing route A to B. There will not be any gates on the new route. It is suggested that if the order is confirmed, there would be no adverse effect with respect to the public enjoyment of the footpath or way as a whole. The new footpath will provide similar views and a safe, convenient footpath away from the driveway, buildings and garden at Musty Houch Barn. Therefore, users of the footpath are likely to find the new route easier to use and feel more comfortable than were they to pass through the residential area and working areas at the Musty Houch Barn. It is proposed that the new route created by the diversion order A to C to B will have the status of public footpath in the first instance. Then subsequently, it's proposed that Lancashire County Council will be asked to consider entering into agreements with the applicants and the owners of the adjacent land crossed by some of the connecting footpaths to dedicate a bridleway that will link to the highway network. You'll no doubt have picked up that a similar situation when this report was being written, that the responses to the consultations were awaited. I can now report that Burnley Borough Council have confirmed that they have no objection to the proposal, and we have received responses in support of the diversion from the Parish Council, the Burnley Bridleways Association and the County Councillor for the Burnley Rural Electoral Division. So the responses are as follows. The chairman of the Burnley Bridleways Association has responded to say, I write on behalf of my members who thoroughly support the application, which creates a much needed off-road link between the multi-user Brun Valley Greenway and Briarcliff. It also facilitates a small circular route of quiet back streets, taking local riders off the main Burnley Road, which has become an accident in waiting over the last years. On behalf of all equestrians, cyclists and walkers, both in the area and further afield, I would ask the committee to support this application. And then the county councillor, Cosima Townley, for the area which is Burnley Rural Division, has said that as the county councillor, I support this application and urge the members of regulatory committee to join me. Briarcliff has seen an exponential growth in equestrian numbers due to agricultural diversification and the redevelopment of former agricultural holdings. Yet it is an area frustratingly free of bridleway provision. This has caused and continues to cause great angst amongst riders and cyclists that are forced to grit their teeth and trust in their guardian angel before girding their loins to face the traffic on the Burnley Road and other thoroughfares of which they have no choice to negotiate before they can access the off-road network. Every yard of bridleway means a little less road and a safer ride. As a county council, we have declared our support for the decarbonisation of our industrial, educational and recreational landscape. We have also recognised and fully support the need for safe off-road travel, whether for utilitarian or recreational purposes. The role of such routes as the one before you play in ensuring a safe and enjoyable passage from front or back or stable doors to facilitate healthy minds and bodies is immeasurable. I therefore have no qualms in urging you to support this application. So the focus of both of those consultation replies is on the benefit of being able to increase the bridleway network. However, we are looking at the footpath diversion at the moment, but it would be, if it's successful, it would be diverting it onto a route that's suitable for an upgrade to bridleway in the future. And in the short term, the landowners intend to provide it as a concessionary bridleway until we can tie up the dedication agreements to formalise that. The parish council have considered the proposal and have said that they've no objection. The landowner is donating a piece of land to create a connection to the bridleway and should be commended. And then the Ramblers have commented in response to the diversion proposal to say that I have no objections to this proposal as it will evidently be on a firm surface, will avoid passing through the farmyard and will be much of the same length, giving access between the same points. As in the usual way, an official path diversion will have to be made so that the definitive map can be brought in line with the change.
Thank you very much, Ross. I just have to ask you, Lindsay, have you anything to add?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I know that Councillor Salter had some thoughts about this over the weekend, so I'll ask you to kick off the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I mean, I have to say it might have been helpful to have heard some of those consultation responses a little earlier. There's certainly some forceful arguments in favour of making the order within the consultation responses. But my chief concern with the diversion before us is that whilst it seems to me to be the case that the current alignment, the current route, is not suitable and that there does need to be a change. It is also the case that there is a current, if we say, user route that is in place that goes, as we've heard, that you could see the entrance on the photograph of point A, that goes along a drive alongside the barn that has been built and has quite an attractive walk closer to the original route. Now, my concern is that the user route has a very scenic view and is a very pleasant route to walk along, and plausibly has a similarly scenic view to the original alignment. However, the new route that is being proposed will require the loss of some trees and arguably will be a less beautiful route to take, in particular in going alongside the rather ugly industrial buildings. And I suppose my concern is that with the loss of that, there is a sense of a loss of public enjoyment of the footpath, which is one of the matters that we have to consider. Now, I'd be interested in what other councillors have to say. If there's a weight of opinion that actually I'm going off on one and that's not a particular issue, then so be it. But that's my concern with what's before us. And if other councillors share the concern, I would be minded to ask officers to perhaps take this away and come back on the basis of looking at a diversion to the currently used route. But I'm interested in others' perspectives.
Does anyone else want to add anything? Councillor Cheetham.
On roads and lanes and sometimes a bit of argy-bargy. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Cheetham. Councillor Oakes.
Yeah, I understand completely where Councillor Salter's coming from, but I think had the responses been received before the meeting and been able to have consideration, then I think perhaps some of his concerns have been allayed by those responses. And I totally agree with Councillor Cheetham that when the local residents and the local organisations support an application, and given the comments in the report, I think that they've considered on balance every scenario really. So I'm comfortable with the recommendation and I would put that forward. Yeah.
Second it.
I was going to speak, but it doesn't matter. Councillor Cheetham has said it all. So I don't really want to add any more to it, other than the fact we're only talking about 220 metres. We're not talking about a marathon footpath. So I would gladly support the proposals.
Yes, I'm very, very sorry I didn't see
No,
you
it's okay.
earlier. I do beg your pardon. Sorry, I'll go again. All those in. Date of the next meeting isn't until the 17th of November. And thank you all for coming this morning. And it looks as though the sun's with us. Thank you.